Okay, class, pop quiz. Question number 1. You want to buy a video game system. Super NES gives you 4 free games. Sega gives you no free games. Which do you choose?
Any Super NES system, and for $3.50 postage, we'll send you Super Mario All-Stars. That's 4 games free. Now, who would miss an offer like that?
Could you repeat the question?
It wasn't just Nintendo, Capcom, and Konami that made platformers for the Super Nintendo. There were a plethora of titles released for this system, and I won't be able to cover all of them, but next we're just going to cover a bunch of titles that may be tied into some of these themes. In the early 1990s, there were a whole bunch of third-party companies that were trying to rival Nintendo with their own cutesy mascot. Some of these would be animals, and some of these would be people, and some would be a combination of both. This was also during a time where almost every popular TV show or movie got some sort of video game adaptation, and most of those would be side-scrolling platform games. A variety of third-party developers would attempt to adapt a lot of these properties into a video game, and these were done with varying results. Some of these were very good, some of these were not so good, so let's go ahead and take a look at a few of these. Aero, the AcroBat was developed by Iguana Entertainment and published by Sunsoft in 1993. The story of this game puts you in the title role of Aero the AcroBat, the greatest star of the World Amusement Circus and Fun Park, and you have to defend it from your evil nemesis, a spoil-rich kid named Edgar Ector, who was a regular attendant but was banned over 20 years ago after a failed prank almost killed one of their lions. This game is a typical 2D side-scrolling platformer, in which you must accomplish certain tasks in each level so that the exit will be revealed. You can attack enemies by shooting stars or by doing an aerial diagonal drill attack, and if you earn enough points at the end of each level, you can go on to a bonus stage, which is done with a Mode 7 style. And in terms of my experience with this game, this is the first time I have played it. It's decently challenging and took me a little bit to get used to, but after a few times through, I was able to make my way through the game. Aero the AcroBat received positive reviews when it was first released, and they've softened a little bit from 8 to 7 out of 10 in most reviews that I've seen. And the game was successful enough to spur a sequel, which, in my opinion, is a bit better than the first game, and that is also what I've seen in other reviews of this title. To quote Electronic Gaming Monthly, they described it as a solid and satisfying sequel to the original, citing good graphics, numerous techniques, large levels, and ingeniously designed secret areas. Aero the AcroBat 2 also has lived up well in more contemporary reviews, and I would definitely recommend it on your Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And there's even a third game called Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, which is seen more as a spin-off sequel, which is not as well reviewed due to difficult controls. The game Bubsy is almost an exact representation of the war that was going on between the cute animated console platforming cartoon mascots. The first game, called Bubsy in Claw's Encounter of the Furred Kind, hit the Super Nintendo first in May of 1993 and later for the Genesis. The plot focuses on a race of fabric-stealing aliens called Woolies who have stolen the world's yarn ball supply, especially Bubsy's, who apparently owns the world's largest collection. And basically your job is to maneuver the title character through levels, jumping on Woolies, and collecting stray yarn balls. However, for the most part, every review I've seen of this game compares it a lot to Sonic the Hedgehog, which is something I kind of picked up on when I was playing the game, but didn't fully realize until I saw somebody else put it in that perspective. Once that was pointed out to me though, that's all I can think of when I was playing this game. Initial reviews were around 7 to 8 out of 10, and that is exactly where I would put this. I think it's actually not too bad, but in more retrospective reviews and modern times, I see people really just calling it a pale imitation of Sonic, a Sonic ripoff, and I'd rather be playing Sonic. And I hesitate to say that's also my perspective because of my limited experience with this game. So I don't know, anyone who's played this back in the day or anyone who picks up and plays it afterwards, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. The game received a sequel the following year in 1994 for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis at the same time, and this game to me feels a little bit more polished, maybe because they were able to work out some of the bugs of the first game, but again, I see a lot of reviews mention the lack of originality in this game and that it just becomes another platformer after a while. Still, reviews of Bubsy 2 are also high up there in the 8 out of 10, and I didn't see anything game-breaking with this to sour my thoughts on this game either. Bugs Bunny Rabbit Rampage was an action video game developed by Viacom New Media and published by Sunsoft exclusively for the Super Nintendo. In this game, you play as Bugs Bunny, who is trapped by Daffy Duck in a painting, and you have to make your way through various stages based on old Looney Tunes cartoons. Perhaps it's my nostalgia of Looney Tunes talking, but I didn't find this game bad at all. The platforming controls are very tight, the level design seems kind of straightforward. It may be a little bit on the easier side, especially at the beginning, but I'd give this a 7 or 8 out of 10 overall. Can't really go wrong with this one. Mickey Mania, The Timeless Adventures of Mickey Mouse, was developed by Traveler's Tales and published by Sony ImageSoft for the Super Nintendo, as well as the Genesis and Sega CD. In this game, the player controls Mickey Mouse, and you have to navigate through various side-scrolling levels, each of them based on classic Mickey Mouse cartoons. Kinda sounds familiar, doesn't it? This game was created in part to celebrate Mickey's 65th birthday, which would have been in 1993. However, as that would have only allowed for 6 months to develop the game was altered a bit in order to give them more development time. Making your way through each level, you can attack enemies by either jumping on them or by using a limited supply of marbles which are collected throughout the level. Mickey can take up to 5 hits, represented by the fingers he holds up on his hand, and they can be replenished by collecting stars. Overall, you will visit 6 unique areas based on different Mickey Mouse cartoons. However, this version is missing a 7th area included in other versions. Overall, I feel that this is an average platformer. Again, this is one that I did not play back in the day, but playing it today made it kind of fun, but it is a bit too easy, making it more well-suited to fans of Mickey Mouse, or just children in general. I'd give it about a 7.5 out of 10. Mickey Mania was meant to have a sequel, however that game was scrapped when developer Traveler's Tales decided to focus more on a game based on Toy Story. Which is a shame, as though Toy Story looks great on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, I don't feel like it's really worth it to play this game, at least not today. I think the controls of this game are a bit atrocious, and it's hard for me to get through it, just mainly due to how monotonous it is. I remember renting this back in the day and immediately being disappointed with it more than once as I tried to give this game a fair shot, assuming that I was just missing something each level, but nope, it's just as bad today. I would say this one's an easy skip. The adaptation of The Jungle Book was developed by Eurocom Entertainment Software and published by Virgin Interactive Entertainment in 1994 for the Super Nintendo. In this game, you must guide young Mowgli through various side-scrolling levels similar to that of Pitfall. You can either shoot or avoid enemies while running, jumping, and climbing vines to collect a certain number of gems and then finding a specific character in the level. At the end of about every other level, you will face a boss. You have 6 minutes to collect the required number of gems needed to complete the level, and this varies based on the difficulty you select, with the total number of gems being 15. Overall, I felt this was a standard platform, and I give it about a 7 out of 10. The Lion King was developed by Westwood Studios and Disney Software and published again by Virgin Interactive Entertainment. This game was a personal favorite of mine on the Sega Genesis, and playing it on the Super Nintendo, I was pleasantly surprised to see that the gameplay is pretty well intact, and depending on the song, the music is actually very well done as well. In this game, you control Simba as you go through the events of the film, going through both child and adult forms as the game progresses. I very fondly remember the early stages in this game, but starting with about the waterfall in Hakuna Matata, that's where my nostalgia basically hits a brick wall and I stop enjoying the game. It's not bad, but again, I would give it about a 7 out of 10, ranking it more along the average, with my personal nostalgia wanting to rank it higher. But starting with the frustrating waterfall, and again, the kind of maze-like nature of one of the other final levels, it keeps me from ranking it a bit higher like other reviewers do. Strangely, my opinion directly contrasts another review I read that said, even though the game is much harder than Aladdin, it's never unfair or frustrating. So I guess I don't know, what do you guys think about this game? Maui, Mallard and Cold Shadow was developed by Disney Interactive Studios, which, after the success of the Aladdin video game adaptations, Disney Interactive decided to bring their development in-house instead of licensing their IPs to third-party developers. Inspirations for this game included television shows Hawaii Five-0, Magnum P.I., as well as games such as Earthworm Jim, Gunstar Heroes, and Vector Man. Besides being another typical platformer, this game changes it up a little bit by having Donald Duck in the title role transfer between two different characters. You start out in the first level as Maui Mallard, but in the second level you can turn into Cold Shadow, which is his ninja alter ego. Where Maui defends himself by using a pistol that shoots bugs, Cold Shadow uses a bow staff in short-range attacks. After the second level, you can switch between the two characters at will. That is, provided you can pay the fee to do so. The amount of ninja tokens you have also determines Cold Shadow's strength. Overall, I found this to be a very good and addicting platformer. I think the biggest thing that held this game back is the fact that it released so late into the Super Nintendo's life cycle, being released in North America in January of 1997. Even the N64 was out by then. Game reviewers of the time also mentioned this, however some of them hailed it as the best low-tech title to come out in the year of 1997, with the words low-tech really meaning that it was on an old, dead platform. But for me, in 1997, my most current console was the Super Nintendo. I wouldn't get a PlayStation for at least another 2 years. So this one was a welcome constant rental for me back in 1997. And I recommend it to you as well if you have a Super Nintendo and you want to play a game that's not as well known on the system. Claymates is a game I decided to add into this review because it was suggested by so many fans who knew that I liked the Clay Fighters series. This game is made by the same development company that used clay animation in their titles, but instead of being a fighting game, this is a 2D platformer. In this game, after being transformed into a ball of clay, you are tasked with saving your father from an evil witch doctor, which has you embark on an epic journey across the globe and even outer space. And after playing this, I found it's actually a pretty decent platformer and is very competent on its own. I like that depending on which level you're in, you can transform into a different animal or object by picking up samples of serum lying on the ground that transformed you in the first place, as I felt that it kept the gameplay from getting stale and monotonous. I'd give this about an 8 out of 10. Congo's Caper is another side-scrolling platform video game that I was not familiar with. It was released in North America in May of 1993 and published by Data East. In this game you play as kind of a half-human and half-monkey named Congo, who is on a quest to rescue his girlfriend after she is abducted by a demon. It really fits the mold of a platformer well, and I would give it around an 8 or 9 out of 10 because the controls are just very well done, and it kind of reminds me of some of the other games on this platform that are just done really well from this time period. I find Cool Spot to be a very interesting case, because it is a game that was developed and published by Virgin Games, who licensed the mascot of a soft drink to make a video game. And I thought, because of my experience on licensed properties not being very good, that this game would just suck. But this is actually one of my favorite games of this time period, regardless of the console. You play as the title mascot, Cool Spot, and you can shoot bubbles in any direction, as well as jump and climb. Your goal in each level is to rescue other Cool Spots that have been imprisoned in cages, make your way to the end of the level, and then repeat. If you collect enough spots throughout the level, you will go on to a bonus stage, which I think has some of the best level theme music I've ever heard from a video game, and it's shocking that it's from this obscure licensed property. I will note that this is not my favorite version of the game, but if you only had the Super Nintendo to play it on, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Flashback, The Quest for Identity, is billed as a science fiction cinematic platform game. It was developed by French studio Delphine Software, and originally published by US Gold in the US. Now, this is a game I view similar to Prince of Persia. It was a groundbreaking title for its time, but it's not a title I find myself wanting to come back to many years later. However, like Prince of Persia, this game uses very fluid character animations that wasn't common in early video games. However, instead of using rotoscope animation, they used a more complicated method of tracing video images onto transparencies. This game requires you to explore each level by running, jumping, grabbing onto ledges, climbing, using elevators, as well as defending yourself against enemies with a force shield, a pistol with unlimited ammunition, but most of your time will be spent trying to solve the game's puzzles. I remember not making it very far back in the day, and I'm very glad that strategy guides are much more accessible today, because if you're going to play this game, you're probably going to need one. Overall, I'd say it's not a bad game to play, but it's not one I'd recommend for everybody. I'd still give it about a 7 out of 10. Which again, I'm well aware this is not the norm. There are a lot of people who consider this one of the best games of all time. It holds the Guinness World Record as the best-selling French game of all time, and has been nominated and won a few Game of the Year awards. Another World is another game developed by Delphine Software. However, this version in the US was known as Out of This World. Again, this was another groundbreaking title for in-game animation, with almost full-screen animated cutscenes playing out throughout the game's opening and as you progress. Again, in this game, you have to make your main character run, jump, and attack, as well as perform other situation-specific actions, such as rocking a cage back and forth to be able to escape. Just like their later game Flashback, I do believe you'll probably want a strategy guide or at least some way to know what to do, as it can be a little tedious now trying to figure out what to do in each level. Overall, I put this in the same ranking as Flashback, again a title that was very influential and iconic for its time, but just doesn't live up as well today for modern gamers. But nonetheless, it still gets a 7 out of 10 from me. Alright, here we go again. Hagane, The Final Conflict, is a 1994 action platform game. It was developed by CA Production and published by Red Entertainment and Hudson for the Super Nintendo in 1994. In this game, you take control of a ninja cyborg named Hagane on his path to take revenge on an opposing ninja faction. This game combines traditional Japanese ninja and samurai aesthetics with a futuristic setting. You have the choice of switching between 4 different weapons, including a sword, chain, shuriken, and grenades, but you also have access to a limited number of magic attacks, which when used will clear the screen of enemies. Throughout the game, you will also end up executing a wide variety of moves, including somersaults, flying jump kicks, wall jumping, sliding, and charge attacks. This game can be a bit challenging as you start out the game with 3 hits and you're dead. However, you can get power-ups that will increase your health beyond 3 hits, but even still, when you die, your health meter gets reset back to 3 hits and then you die again. Stages are very short with very few checkpoints across the game, and running out of lives will put you back at the start of the chapter should you choose to continue. Powering off your console will make you lose all progress as there is no save feature. Add all those up and you'll see some of the frustrating things we gamers in the 90s had to grow up with. Despite the frustrating challenge of this game, I still find myself wanting to come back to it as I found myself getting a bit farther each time. Game reviews of the time have been critical of this game's soundtrack and visual appearance, but all praised the gameplay in one way or another. I would give this game about an 8.5 out of 10, and that's about in line with the reviews of the time. That is my modern perspective, as this is not a game I grew up playing, and I'm very glad it was recommended to me to put into this review. Now, I wanted to include Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit specifically because I think it is crazy that they decided to make a 2D side-scrolling platform game based on the show Home Improvement. This game is very much evidence of the licensed video game hell that we had to suffer through in the 90s, where if it was something that was popular, it got a 2D platform game made out of it. The plot of this game is that on a special broadcast of the show Tool Time, the show within a show on the sitcom, Tim Taylor prepares to unveil a brand new Binford tool, only to discover that his tools have gone missing. In their place is a ransom note demanding that Tim go to other sets where other shows are being filmed to recover his tools. And here's where things start to go slightly off base here. You are given a nail gun, a blowtorch used as a flamethrower, and a saw that will be used to fight dinosaurs, acid-spewing mummies, robots, and other enemies. And if you are hoping for a game manual to explain all this to you, there is not one. Instead, there's a sheet of paper explaining that real men don't need instructions. Which I have to say is the most faithful part of the adaptation of this TV show. Because we all remember that classic episode of Home Improvement where Tim Taylor battled the dinosaurs and mummies, right? Reviews when this game came out, crazy to me, but they got mixed to positive reception. However, due to the nature of how this game was adapted, it has made it on several lists of the weirdest video games ever produced. Overall, I found this to be a substandard platforming experience, with a lot of the biggest cliches that I don't like in video games being added in here. The controls to me feel a bit broken, some of the objects are put in places that you really can't reach them, and I got bored with this very quickly. I'd give this a 5 or a 6 out of 10, but reviews at the time were a bit more kind to this game, giving it more of a 6 to 7 out of 10. The Flintstones, The Treasure of Sierra Madrock, is a 1994 side-scrolling video game by Taito for the Super Nintendo. It hit consoles in North America in March of 1994. The story of this game is loosely based around the Flintstones cartoon series of the 1960s, and the title itself is a reference to the 1927 novel The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and its 1948 film adaptation. In the opening of this game, there's a cutscene showing the Water Buffalo's leader that decides to retire. As his last decree as the Great Poobah, he decides to hold a contest where whoever finds the treasure of Sierra Madrock will be his successor. In the game, Fred Flintstone and Marty Rubble must find the treasure before any other Buffalo member, or even their wives, Wilma and Betty. You start out on the overworld map, which is basically like a game board. With a cast of the die, you're on your way to some of the game's levels. Depending on where you land, you must clear the level, defeat a boss, enter shops, or complete one of the other game's objectives. If you're in a level where you run into Wilma or Betty with the correct character, you will be dragged back to another place across the board. Overall, each level is short but offers a simple platforming challenge. Barney and Fred both use a wooden club to defeat enemies and clear obstacles in each level. There are also power-ups scattered throughout the level which will give you in-game currency, extra energy. However, some power-ups are a trap that can actually be to your detriment. And while I never owned this game as a kid, this game was another frequent rental for me back in the day. I was definitely a fan of the Flintstones television show reruns that went all throughout the 80s and early 90s. And this is one of the first games I remember playing where the levels were selected by random chance, or at least seemingly random chance, by rolling a die and moving across a game board. And this mechanic, not knowing if you were going to still beat the game even though you may have mastered it, kinda kept me interested in it for a little while. Looking at reviews of this game, I have seen some mixed to negative reviews surrounding this title. But in all honesty, I don't really have much bad to say about it. It's a standard platformer, I give it about a 7 out of 10, and is one I fondly remember. But I get the impression not very many people bought it because the pricing on this one is a bit higher than a standard Super Nintendo game, so it's up to you whether or not you want to collect it. And in my opinion, out of the two Flintstones games that I'm aware of on the Super Nintendo, this one is the weaker of the two. The game, simply titled The Flintstones, is an adaptation of the live-action 1994 film of The Flintstones. Which I do fondly remember that adaptation of seeing it 100 times as a kid, but it's not really that good of a movie. In the game, you play as Fred Flintstone, who must rescue Pebbles, Bam Bam, Barney, and Wilma from the evil Cliff Vandercave, and to do so you have to go through some standard platforming levels, except did I mention this game was developed by Ocean Software, because that should give you a hint as to the game's quality. The game is a fairly standard platformer, but again, a lot of those cliches I don't like in video games are present in this one. For example, a lot of the trickier enemies in this game are ones that hide just off camera and you have to react very quickly to them. And don't get me started with the how do you get onto this ledge kind of nonsense. So yeah, overall I would say this one's easily skippable. I give it about a 5 out of 10 without anything really drastically sticking out other than how mediocre and boring it is. And since there's already another Flintstones game I like better than this one, I would say this is an easy skip. As you can see, there is no shortage of platformers for the Super Nintendo. A lot of the games I've featured in this video are also available on other platforms. And while I'm not yet ready to compare those versions between each other, what I'll say for now is that some of my favorites out of this lot definitely has to include Maui Mallard in Cold Shadow. I don't think a lot of people have given this game a second thought because it was one game that a lot of us skipped over this time frame, as it was one of the last games released for the Super Nintendo. But I definitely feel like there were some late hits with platformers on this system, I think especially when developers started to get a handle on the hardware, as well as what works well in a platformer video game. Mickey Mania, The Lion King, and some of the other Disney games on here are also favorites of mine, but of course I've been a fan of most of those products in other media, so that might be swaying my opinion a bit, but there are some really good titles here. Another game I think a lot of people would just skip over, especially if they know what it's based on, is Cool Spot. I don't remember what possessed me to try this game out the first time. Maybe it was the fact that I liked the commercials with Cool Spot in it. But this game definitely scratches that nostalgia itch for me while still providing with a platformer that I think is still fun to play. But as you can see here, there are still more platformers to cover, as again, I think this is the #1 genre of game on this system. So in the next video, we're going to continue taking a look at more platform games. Let me know which ones I haven't covered yet you would like to see. Also let me know in the comments what you thought about the games I showcased today, and if you have any fond memories playing those, or if you tried them out for the first time many years later. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.